about social media is it gives you much better access to decision makers. When I first started off in journalism, we had things called cuttings libraries, where someone would go through the newspapers every day and cut physically with scissors, cut things out of newspapers and put them in files. And if you wanted to know what some politician thought about something, you would get his file out, and if you were lucky it would be a good file, it would be complete, and you'd say, oh, that's interesting, he said this 6 months ago, 6 years ago, if it was a really good library, 16 or even 60 years ago. You had a very deep, if you were lucky, knowledge of what the politician had said. And you also, if you were lucky, you might have their home phone number. This was before the days of mobile phones. And you would phone them up at home, and if they were very, very modern, they might have an answering machine, and if they were very, very old-fashioned, they might have a housekeeper or a butler if they were rich, and you would leave a message saying, this is Edward Lucas from the BBC, can so-and-so please call back. And that was how we worked, and that was basically a model of journalism unchanged since the invention of the telephone. And this has changed absolutely now. If I want to know about a politician, the first thing I do is I look at their Twitter feed, and most politicians have Twitter feeds. They may be very exciting in the case of Donald Trump. They may be rather less exciting in the case of the world's most famous Latvian, Valdis Dombrovskis. But there will be a Twitter feed. There almost certainly is one. If there isn't, it's kind of remarkable that they don't tweet. And that gives you a very good idea about what they've said. Not only that, if you're lucky, maybe they follow you on Twitter. This is something that politicians do sometimes to show off. They like to show that they follow people. They're not just one-way streets. But if you're lucky, a politician follows you on Twitter, or maybe you're friends on Facebook, and you can send them a direct message. Hi, need to talk to you urgently for a story. This is like sending a text message, but in a way it's even more immediate. You can map their networks. You can say, isn't that interesting? Theresa May follows Donald Trump, but Donald Trump doesn't follow Theresa May. I just made that up. But, these things are revealing. You start seeing maps of who follows what. Isn't it interesting that this politician follows only this sort of news and not that sort of news? Or maybe this politician is a complete egomaniac and doesn't follow anybody, or follows only news in one language. That's interesting. They claim to speak English, but actually they're only consuming news in some other language. So you can start drawing a very good picture of what people are like from their behaviour on social media, and that's useful. The social media is like printing now. It's really, really important in terms of just publishing the article and getting it out. It improves your reach and it improves your impact, because your story can go viral. People who really like the sort of thing you're writing about send it to all their friends who may not necessarily read The Economist, but they do want to read everything about Baltic States or cybersecurity or whatever it is I'm writing about. And so your story takes on legs, it takes on life of its own and reaches. So I'll finish off by saying that I think that we're at a very early stage on this. We've only really had 4 or 5 years of widespread integration of social media with the upstream and the downstream. There's a lot more still to happen, so it'd be rash to draw any big conclusions from what we've seen at the moment. But I will make 2 points. One is that I think that we are thriving and surviving. Social media is not the death of journalism, it changes the journalistic environment, and we are adapting and we are making money, and it's absolutely not the death of old media. And the other is, I think the tide is turning against anonymity. I wrote a whole book about this, so I'll just say a couple of sentences about this on it now. But I think that we baked anonymity into the internet when we started, both anonymity in terms of what an IP address represents, what a login and a password represent, the ability to set up an email address, a social media account, and so on. And that's all great, and it's never going to go away, but I think we're moving away from the idea that anonymity is the default setting. I think we're expecting a much higher standard of identity assurance, both when it comes to who we interact with on a personal level, so interaction from someone who's a real person with that little blue tick matters a lot more than someone who's got made up name 1, 2, 3, 4, 21, follows 21 people, and is followed by the famous Jamie, the YouTube gamer, who everyone seems to be followed back by. So we're getting much more sceptical about these mass-produced anonymous accounts, and I think we're getting much more sceptical about anonymous websites as well. We're going to, and I think you're going to see huge developments on this in the next year or so as companies such as Google and Facebook and Twitter and others start unrolling tools which will tell you whether that site has those crucial things like a real world address, real people writing for it, real whois registrations, and perhaps even real news. Thank you.